The simple question we got to ask ourselves, is God real? That's what we're going to be ultimately breaking down today. Is God real? See, right now, there are a lot of people that are alive that don't believe in God. And, well, maybe that's fair because it is a human experience to need some type of proof or evidence in order to believe that anything is real. And that is ultimately what we're going to try to do today, is just break down whether or not God is actually real. So that way, if perhaps you don't believe in God, you can have a more firm understanding and maybe even decide to do something about your non-belief. See, the first thing I want to do is I want to go ahead and reference the book of John. And it's specifically the first couple of words in the book of John, where he says, "In the beginning, the Word already existed." The Word being God. The Word was with God, and the Word was God. He existed in the beginning with God. God created everything through him, and nothing was created except through him. The Word gave life to everything that was created, and his life was brought light to everyone. So that is what we're talking about here today, is the fact that did God already exist? And who created God? But we have to first accept the fact that we were created. So now if we were created by something, this universe, well, has it ever been proven that the animate was created by the inanimate? Something had to have started the very, very beginning. And so the question always comes up, well, who created God? Well, the answer is quite simple. Nothing did, because God already existed. God is. The Word was God. And that's the concept that is really hard for people to grasp, because as a human, in our experience, there's always a beginning and an end. There is a creator and then a creation. But to understand God, you have to first accept the fact that God is an entity and has always been. Just is, that space and time hold no bounds. And so once you can grasp that fact, well, then the rest of what we're going to talk about becomes easier to understand. We already know that the animate cannot be created by the inanimate. It's never been scientifically proven. So that right there should already give you some type of faith in the fact that there is a God, a creator of the universe. The same way there's something that created the paintings and the buildings, an architect, a painter, a writer wrote the books. Your parents made you. The universe made the first, humans. Well, what is that universe? Well, the universe is God. The universe was created by God. And so we could take a look at a couple of things like the fine tuning of that universe, understanding that even the gravitational constants, we're talking about 1 in 10 fiftieths to the power of 50. That small of a change would make life impossible. So 1 in 10 to the 50th power would change the way that everything is. Nobody would be able to exist. So who could create something so specific? It had to be a very particular type of ingredient. And so us in our human experience, we have such a limited understanding of what we are and who we are and how we exist and what we do. But it's super, super important to understand that as humans, we can't grasp some things. Even the smartest humans to ever exist simply just cannot grasp what it is that we are and what we do. We can't even see beyond this universe. We're unable to even get there. We can't even get into a spaceship yet and travel that far. Like, we just can't. We can take telescopes and read light patterns, but we can't actually get out there. That concept should show you the actual limitations of what we really can and can't do. And we have this stubbornness as humans where we have this desire to understand, and that because we're limited in our understanding, it must not exist. Like, if we didn't hear something fall in the woods, that tree, well, then it probably didn't happen. But that's just simply not the case. Just because we can't understand it doesn't mean it's not a reality. The second thing we should be talking about is the DNA. DNA is not random. It's written in codes. Your body contains over 3 billion base pairs of DNA. Every cell reads and executes this code like software. Information theory proves that information never comes from chaos, only from intelligence. Well, information theory sounds a lot like science. So are we saying that science and Christianity or the belief in God are not that different? Because there's this understanding, there's this concept that you can't, it's either science or religion. It's either science or it's God. But is it possible that God and the belief of that in Christianity is not so different than belief in science? And in fact, they even support each other? Like that science could be a way for us to simply understand what we are as far as a creation of God? Perhaps. But the next thing I want to talk about is something that's called the moral law. In the moral law inside you, all cultures agree on basic values. Don't murder, don't steal, and protect the innocent. Evolution explains survival, not mortality. Not morality. And so the inner law points to a moral lawgiver. That means that if we all can agree on a certain moral law, even though we're from different parts of the world, well, then who has instilled us with that depth? Who has given us that depth? Who has given us that feeling? Who has given us that inner code of right and wrong that is so universally accepted? Strange concept. And so then the last point that I want to bring up is all the individuals who didn't believe in God. Well, then why did they all of a sudden start to believe in God, particularly in Christianity, particularly in the relationship that is so critical with Jesus Christ? That through that relationship and through building that bond with Christ can then be saved. Meaning that when we are done and this life is over, our soul can then enter the kingdom of heaven. What would make somebody who was maybe an agnostic or even an atheist all of a sudden believe in the fact that God exists in that capacity? Well, it would be some type of changed experience, some type of personal encounter, with God. See, they say in the Gospels, ask and you shall receive. Jesus says, seek and you shall find. He says, knock and the door will be open to you. I think one of the big issues is a lot of people aren't asking. They're not seeking. They're not submitting. What they're doing is they're testing God. When they do ask, they say, well, if you're real, show me. Who are you to challenge God? And again, it goes into our ego as people, as a human race. This ego thinking that the world and the universe really is all about us. And through that thought, allow us to believe that somehow we are equal to God and somehow we are comparable to God. And so then the thought might say, well, you know what? If God's real, why didn't he show his face? Why doesn't he come and show us? Why is it a big guessing game? Well, let me go and bring you back a few thousand years to the birth of somebody we know today as Jesus of Nazareth. See, Jesus was God, and he was sent here to be a walking, living, and breathing embodiment of God. And you have to think, in our free will as humans, what we chose to do was to choose our ignorance, to choose our egos and our pride, to prevent ourselves from breaking from what we thought to be true in our own understanding, and we actually killed God. Think about that for a second. And I'm certain that if the same thing were to happen today, if Jesus were to come back again, in that sense, because he will come back, but when he does, it will be a whole different type of day. Read the book of Revelation if you want to know what I'm talking about. But if he were to do the same thing that had happened 2,000 years ago, I don't think the story would be much different. I think there would be people who simply refuse to believe because that is what the human dilemma is all about. That is what God has gifted us with, is the gift of free will. So, is God real? Well, hopefully some of the things that we spoke about today help you understand that it takes more belief and faith to assume that God is not real than it does to assume that he is. But I'll leave the ball in your court.